So now we have made the dimensions in our drawing. Let's modify these dimensions. But before that, let's have a look at a new layer which is always created when you make a new dimension, and that layer is def point. So when you click on this layer drop down, you'll notice this def points layer. So this is the definition points layer, short for def points, which is always created whenever a dimension is added, and it stores all the definition points of your dimensions. It is always recommended to keep this definition points layer. You should not delete it, and if you try to delete this definition points layer from the layer properties manager, it won't be deleted, but obviously you can use ladle tool to delete it. But if you delete this def points layer, the drawing may start to show some errors. Also, the def points layer is on a no plot layer. That means the contents of this def points layer will not appear when you print your drawing. So most people use this property of def points layer to place objects which they don't want to show in the plot, but I would not recommend that. You can create a new layer and put all of the objects on that, and you can turn off the plot for that layer. Now moving on, here we have this drawing with some of the dimensions. Now this dimension is basically divided into three parts. Now the first part here, let's look at this dimension. I'll zoom here. Now the first part is the dimension line, which is this line with these arrowheads at the end. So that's called the dimension line. Now we have the extension line, which are these two lines. So this one is the extension line and this one is the extension line. You can see that by default the extension lines start from the point where we clicked, but a small gap is maintained. So that is done to keep the dimensions legible so that the dimensions can be easily identified from the drawing. Also, the third part is dimension text, which is here. Now we can modify all of these parameters of the dimension separately, and I'll start with this dimension here. So let's click on this dimension and now move on to this grip and hold your cursor, don't click. You'll see plenty of options here. Let's start with the stretch option. So click on this stretch and now you'll be able to stretch this dimension simply wherever you want. Similarly, when you hold your cursor there, select move with dimension line, it will have a similar effect on your dimensioning. Now go to this grip and now select move text only, and obviously in this case the text will move, but your dimension line and extension line will remain unaffected. So let's click here and here we have it. Now let's go to the same grip and now select move with leader line, and a new leader line will be added with its trailing end on the dimension line, just like this. So let's go to this again and let's select move above dim line, and it will take your dimension above dimension line no matter where the position of this text is. Let's go here and now select center vertically. We have it here. It's now centered vertically on the dimension line, and now let's select the last option, which will reset its position to the default value, just like this. There are also plenty of options which are associated with different grips. For example, in this case we have this diameter now selected, and let's select this grip. Now in this grip we have only these two options, the stretch and flip arrow. We have already seen the stretch, by which you can stretch the grip point, and using flip arrow you can change the direction of this arrow. So I'll go to this grip and select flip arrow. Now in this case the dimension line has this flipped arrow. You can do the same for this side as well. So I'll flip the arrow and here we have it. So now this flipping of arrow can be used at crowded places where the arrow might be overlapping with the parts of the drawing, or if there is not enough space for the dimension text. In that case you can flip the arrow to generate room for the dimension text. The dimensions which we are adding here is associative, and that simply means that the dimension is always related with its parent geometry, and when the parent geometry changes, the dimension updates itself. Now to explain this, I'll change some of the geometries in this drawing. So I'll start with this circle. Now click here, and using these grips, let's click on this quadrant and change its radius. So as you can see that the current radius is 15.77 units. I'll just decrease its value and look at the radius. It's now changed to 10.11. So in this case the dimension was associative, and that's why it has changed. Now let's do the same for this side. In this case you can see that the length of this side is 60.66 units. Now let's select this stretch tool and I'll stretch this side of the geometry here. Now press enter and I'll click here, and as I stretch you'll notice that the dimension is also changing because it is associative dimension. Let's click here, and here we have the changed dimension. So as long as your dimension is associative, it will change along with the geometry, but you can break this associativity simply by moving this grip. So if I move my grip from this point to somewhere over here, it will no longer remain associative. And now if I stretch my geometry, I'll click here and now I'll stretch it. You'll notice that it will not change the dimension, as we have already broken the associativity of this point with this end point. You can again make it associative by simply selecting the grip and moving it to this end point. Now it's once again associative, and if you select the stretch tool, the dimension will once again change along with that. So this was all about modifying the dimensions in AutoCAD drawing.